They pierce the skylines of our most ancient cities. Majestic domes and towering spires we have come to accept as symbols of faith, their true purpose never questioned. From our earliest days, we are taught a simple story, that these magnificent structures, cathedrals, mosques, temples, were raised for spiritual devotion alone. But if one casts aside the weight of dogma and observes this architecture with the dispassionate eye of an engineer, a different reality emerges, a reality as unsettling as it is obvious. Complex metallic finials, tiered geometric arrays, spires that do not merely point to the heavens, but seem engineered to interact with them. They bear a striking resemblance not to objects of worship, but to sophisticated technical instruments. These are not mere ornaments. They are complex antennae, functional systems designed to interface with the very fabric of the atmosphere, with its latent electricity, with the ether itself. Across continents, these buildings share a suspiciously uniform design language, as if they were all nodes in a single planetary energy grid. The concept of free, wireless power, a notion now dismissed as pseudoscience or deliberately forgotten, may have been a simple fact of life for a civilization that came before. It defies all logic to believe that a society, which official history tells us moved by horse-drawn carriage and lit its homes with wood splinters, would expend colossal, almost impossible resources on such technologically complex objects for ritual alone. A more rational explanation presents itself. We are living among the ruins of a highly advanced infrastructure. Its function has been lost, or perhaps intentionally concealed. The buildings themselves later repurposed by a new people who had forgotten the knowledge of their ancestors. Herein lies the fundamental paradox, a screaming discrepancy in the accepted timeline of technology. We are asked to believe these masterpieces of stone, marble, and metal were created in the 18th and 19th centuries, a time textbooks portray as primitive and fragmented. Yet the quality of the said, the ubiquitous use of conductive metals, point to an industrial capacity that not only rivals, but in many cases surpasses our own. Who were the true architects of this global network in a world supposedly just emerging from endless conflict? From where were the resources drawn to construct thousands of these sites simultaneously across the planet, when the economies of the era could scarcely provide for the basic needs of their people? Even more profoundly, the very scale of these structures becomes a source of deep bewilderment when measured against the physiology of an ordinary human being. The monuments stand in silent testament, their silent stones asking a question we have forgotten how to answer. Were they truly built for us at all? To step inside the grand halls of antiquity, the cathedrals, the palaces, the cavernous train parent. Doorways soar to impossible heights, their handles placed so high they demand a conscious effort to reach. Balustrades, meant for support, rise to the level of our necks. Colossal steps demand a deliberate, strenuous ascent. Every element seems designed not for us. This world was engineered to a different scale, conceived for beings whose physical capabilities, whose very dimensions, far exceeded those of modern man. We are merely the current occupants of these vacant halls, attempting to adapt their echoing spaces to our own humble existence. But the architecture itself remains, a silent witness, testifying that the true masters and builders of these walls were anything but human, at least as we know ourselves. These architectural dissonances become glaringly obvious the moment we shed the habit of accepting our environment as a given and begin to analyze it through the simple lens of ergonomics. When confronted with doorways reaching 3 times the height of a person, the official narrative is quick to reassure us. This, we are told, is a monument to fashion, a desire by emperors and kings to project their majesty and status. And yet, any architect or engineer will confirm a fundamental truth. Habitable space is always designed around the physical parameters of its end user. No one of sound mind, possessing limited resources and primitive tools, would create doors so massive they cannot be opened without complex mechanisms or a team of servants, unless those doors were intended for beings of a corresponding scale. The evidence is especially stark in the balustrades and railings on the balconies and terraces of ancient buildings. Standards of safety and comfort dictate that a railing should be at waist level or slightly higher, allowing one to lean comfortably while observing the surroundings. In countless structures we claim as our own, these barriers reach a modern person's neck, or even higher. This transforms a balcony from a place of repose into a fortress wall, from which the street below is barely visible. For such a design to become comfortable, its user would need to stand at least 1.5, perhaps even 2 times our height. We are living in a stage set, built to a scale not our own. We use the small carved-out wickets and colossal gates because the primary doors are too massive, too heavy for daily passage. We install raised floors and lowered ceilings, desperate attempts to adapt these gargantuan chambers to our modest need, for we perch on the edge of enormous chairs, trying to make them our own. But the stone itself remembers. It holds the imprint of its original purpose, a constant, unspoken reminder that the true masters of this world were built to a different measure. What if our past holds the memory of an entirely different biological species of human? A race of giants for whom the world's most monumental structures were not temples or palaces, but simple, functional dwellings. Their physical power, their sheer scale and capability, allowed them to erect these stone masterpieces with the same ease that we construct our modern homes. This was a civilization defined not only by its technology, but by a physiology that could command colossal masses of matter. But if we acknowledge the existence of these giants, the architects of a harmonious world with a single unified architecture spanning the entire planet, we're faced with the most unsettling question of all. Where did they go? Why were these majestic cities, built to stand for ages, suddenly abandoned, leaving us with nothing but their silent stone husks? When we examine the chronicles of the late 19th century, a frightening emptiness echoes from the streets of our great metropolises. The cities stand, the buildings are whole, but life itself is a mere flicker. And the strangest feature in this portrait is the disproportionately vast number of children. They are everywhere. In the factories, on the streets, in the fields. It is as if the world was suddenly populated by adolescents and young children, stripped of parental care, forced to shoulder the immense task of rebuilding a civilization they did not create, a world whose very nature they could not possibly understand. Looking closer at the social fabric of the 19th century, we confront a chilling and inexplicable anomaly, one that official history dismisses as the cruel morality of early capitalism. We speak of the widespread, legalized and industrial-scale use of child labor. We speak of an orphan crisis that reached catastrophic proportions. The demographic data of the period paints a disturbing picture. A world suddenly filled with children and teenagers, bereft of their guardians. The records are filled with accounts of overflowing foundling homes and the so-called orphan trains, which crisscrossed continents, transporting thousands of children to unknown futures, a desperate attempt to disperse this enormous population of lonely souls. We are told that children worked in factories and mills, that they descended into mines and stood at machines for 12 to 14 hours a day, driven solely by poverty and a desire to help their families. Yet this explanation crumbles when we ask one simple question. Where were the adult men? In any traditional society, even in the most desperate of times, adults strive to shield their offspring from crushing physical labor. The fact that the exploitation of children became the norm points not to a simple economic crisis, but to a total and catastrophic absence of the able-bodied adult population. The feeling is inescapable, that an entire generation of parents simply vanished, as if they had evaporated from the face of the earth, leaving behind a profound and deafening silence. A silence that we, their inheritors, are still struggling to comprehend. The cities were left in the care of uncomprehending inheritors. No sane society would consign its children to the gears of industry to perform dangerous work on a colossal scale, unless the adults were no longer able to ensure their own survival. This haunting image suggests we are witnesses to the aftermath of a global event, a cataclysm that either annihilated the world's population or somehow reset it entirely. These orphans, who seem to flood the great cities of Europe, the Americas, and the Russian Empire, appear as an artificially restored population, placed into the hollowed-out stage of a former world. They knew nothing of their past, held no memory of their roots. They were the ideal material from which to forge a new society, a blank slate. They were given only primitive knowledge, yet taught to maintain the surviving mechanisms of a lost age, whose principles they could scarcely comprehend. They were forced to survive in a world far too vast, too complex for them to have built. These young inhabitants of the ruins became, in essence, squatters in the metropolises of a vanished civilization. They occupied enormous edifices without ever asking who constructed them, or for what purpose. Their primary task was simply to endure. But even a child's eye could not ignore the profound strangeness of the landscape. The cities they entered, or in which they awoke, bore the scars of a terrible catastrophe. And the most glaring evidence was the architecture itself. Walk the old streets of any major historic center, and the same inexplicable detail emerges. The first floors of the buildings are submerged, sometimes deeply, into the earth. These are not cellars or basements conceived by architects. They are fully formed levels, with elegant windows and grand entrances, now inexplicably below ground, as if the entire city had been buried beneath a titanic layer of silt and soil. This phenomenon of entombed architecture is not an isolated anomaly, unique to one region. Wherever one looks, the historic hearts of Moscow or St. Petersburg, the old quarters of Paris and Rome, even the colonial structures of North America and Australia, the picture is unnervingly consistent. The ground floors of buildings, erected in the so-called classical style, are drowning in the earth. Windows designed by every rule of architecture to admit light and air are sliced in half by the modern sidewalk, transformed into absurd embrasures staring blankly at asphalt and stone. Official science offers a placid explanation: the cultural layer. We are asked to believe that over a few centuries, the inhabitants of these cities simply accumulated enough refuse, debris, and new road surfaces to raise the ground level by 3 to 4 meters. Yet this theory crumbles to dust upon first contact with common sense. It is impossible to imagine a property owner who would calmly watch as mud, filth, and roadwork slowly swallowed the most valuable part of their building, turning windows into useless pits and grand doorways into subterranean passages. The truth, perhaps, is not found in the histories we are told, but in the architecture we are forbidden to question. It speaks of a sudden, silent burial, a foundation of forgotten worlds, resting just beneath the surface of our own. Across the old cities of the world, a strange and unsettling anomaly lies hidden in plain sight. Pavement slowly rises to seal off windows, to engulf grand entrances, transforming what was once a ground floor into a damp subterranean space. The conventional explanation speaks of cultural layers, of road repairs where new surfaces are simply laid over old. But this simple answer crumbles under scrutiny. When modern builders or restorers excavate the foundations of these ancient structures, a startling truth is unearthed. What we have long called basements are in fact complete first stories. They possess towering doorways, intricate architectural details, rusticated stonework, and elegant archways. No architect designs a grand entrance to open into a solid wall of earth. It suggests that the ground level was once significantly lower, that these buildings functioned in a world entirely different from our own. The very soil that conceals these floors deepens the mystery. It is not the rich humus or domestic debris of a mythical cultural layer. Instead, it is a dense, uniform clay or loam, devoid of organic traces. This composition is the telltale signature of a massive alluvial event, the kind of sediment deposited by a catastrophic flood. The evidence points toward a global cataclysm in the mid-19th century, an event that enthusiasts have termed the Great Mud Flood. This disaster appears to have inundated cities across the planet, instantly raising the ground level by several meters. The survivors, or those who came after, simply lacked the resources to excavate entire metropolises. They did the only thing they could. They leveled the new Earth, turned the former second stories into new ground floors, and repurposed the buried levels for storage, or forgot them entirely. This hypothesis offers a chillingly logical explanation not only for the strange architecture, but for the period of apparent decline that preceded our modern technological era. We are living on ruins, lightly dusted with soil, walking quite literally on the rooftops and second stories of a pre-flood world. But if entire cities were buried by the fury of the elements, how then do we explain the existence of even more enigmatic structures? Objects that seem to have been part of a single planetary defense or energy system. These are the star forts, fortifications of flawless geometric design scattered across every continent. The technology implied by their construction suggests not only a unified global standard, but an engineering capability we can only guess at. Their remarkable preservation and identical design confound any attempt to fit them into the conventional history of separate, developing nations. Among the countless riddles bequeathed to us by the past, the star forts stand alone. They are not merely defensive structures, but complex geodetic objects, silent monuments to a history that has been profoundly and deliberately erased. They whisper of a unified world, a lost technology, and a cataclysm that severed us from our own past. A past that is not lost, but merely buried, waiting just beneath the surface to be rediscovered. Etched into the planetary landscape with a startling regularity, a pattern emerges. From Europe to Japan, from North America to the coastlines of Australia and Africa. Conventional history calls them bastion fortifications, a brilliant new design created to defend against the age of artillery. It attributes their construction to different peoples across different eras. Yet their flawless geometry, a symmetry whose full magnificence is revealed only from a celestial vantage point, causes this official story to unravel. To construct such a complex figure, with its perfect rays, symmetrical ramparts, and intricate water channels, while standing on the ground, armed with little more than rope and stakes, borders on the impossible. Such precision, laid out over vast territories, often across the challenging terrain of hills and marshland, would demand not only accurate maps, but a perspective from above. a command of surveying technologies believed to be far beyond the reach of the times to which these structures are dated. The colossal volume of earth and stone required to erect even one of these forts is an undertaking comparable to the building of the Great Pyramids, and there are thousands. We are asked to believe that people who traveled by horse and dug with shovels in the fleeting moments between endless wars and plagues reshaped the entire surface of the planet, creating a single, standardized network of these stellar structures. This appears less a history of scattered defenses and more the footprint of a global infrastructure, the work of a single, unified civilization. A civilization where these objects may have functioned not as forts, but as nodes for the generation or distribution of energy, or perhaps hubs in a forgotten transport network. The water that surrounds most of them may not have been a mere obstacle for infantry, but a conductor, a resonator, vital to their true purpose. This theory of a forgotten global empire finds its echo in our own cities. The civic architecture, the train stations, theaters, museums, and administrative halls in San Francisco and Buenos Aires, in St. Petersburg, Mumbai, and Cape Town are executed in an absolutely identical classical style. We are told this is the legacy of Greco-Roman heritage, or the predictable footprint of colonial influence. But the scale and quality of the execution suggests something else. This is not imitation, it is a standard. The same columned porticos, soaring domes, and vaulted arches appear everywhere, irrespective of local climate or native culture. It is as if a single architectural blueprint was used to build across the entire world. The quality of the stonework, whether granite or marble, is of such a caliber that even modern computer-controlled machinery would struggle to replicate its detail. And yet, we are offered the simple story of the hammer and chisel in the hands of unlettered masons. What we see before us is the irrefutable, physical evidence of a highly developed, globally connected world that existed long before our own. We are left to walk among the silent ruins of a civilization we were never meant to remember, questioning not only who they were, but what it is we have truly forgotten. There are whispers of a technologically advanced society, one that possessed inexhaustible sources of energy and a unified system of governance. We see its echoes in technologies frozen in stone, in the faint traces of a truly global logistics network. Yet, official history performs a stunning contortion to explain the emergence of the most grandiose structures of the 19th century. We are told that many of these masterpieces, which defy all conceivable limits of complexity and beauty, were built from little more than sticks, straw, and plaster. We are asked to believe they were temporary stage sets for exhibitions, only to be ruthlessly demolished 6 months later. One must ask why this narrative was so necessary, and what, precisely, it was designed to conceal. Official historiography presents the phenomenon of the world's fairs of the late 19th and early 20th centuries as a triumph of industrial might. We are told astonishing Talentire metropolises of palaces, canals, and towers were erected on barren land in impossibly short time frames. These complexes, in their architectural majesty, could rival the finest creations of ancient Rome or Athens. Yet, according to the accepted version, all of this splendor was a colossal illusion. A stage set built of wood, plaster, and a temporary material known as staff, made to imitate stone. And the most startling part of this story is that once the festivities concluded, after only a few months, these architectural marvels were unceremoniously demolished, dynamited, or burned, turning the immense labor of thousands into dust. Common sense refuses to accept such profligacy at face value. Consider the economy of the 19th century, an era of limited resources and logistics far from the perfection of our own. Is it plausible that governments and private investors would pour millions, billions in modern currency, into erecting buildings of perfect geometry, intricate sculpture, complete with electrical grids and plumbing, only to wipe them from the face of the earth half a year later? It is an act of economic suicide. A far more logical, and perhaps more chilling, version of events emerges. What if these exhibition cities were not built for the fairs at all? What if they had already been standing there for centuries? The legacy of that same unified, ancient civilization. In this light, the so-called organizers were not builders, but salvagers, conducting an inventory of what had survived a forgotten cataclysm. They cleaned the facades, restored what was usable, and presented these heirlooms to an ignorant public as their own contemporary achievements. And the structures that did not fit the new paradigm? Those too heavily damaged by past catastrophes, or whose very form told a story that needed to be silenced. Under the convenient pretext of closing an exhibition, they were subjected to a final, decisive destruction. History, it seems, is not merely what is remembered, but what is permitted to be remembered. The true ruins may not be those of stone and steel, but the foundations of the very story we tell ourselves. From temporary pavilions, the ideal cover for erasing the traces of the past. And here, the most effective instrument of oblivion takes the stage: fire. The history of these inextricably linked to colossal, all-consuming conflagrations. The famed Crystal Palace, the grand pavilions of Chicago and beyond, they burned with a suspicious regularity, a startling intensity. Fire consumed the blueprints, which perhaps never existed at all. It melted steel frames and turned stone to sand, securely concealing the true technologies of their construction. The old proverb that ashes tell no tales was never more applicable. The new masters of the world acted with methodical precision. They burned the palaces. They chiseled away the incorrect symbols from the facades. They melted down giant statues and rewrote the historical chronicles, tailoring them to fit an official version of humanity's development. A simple march from primitive origins to modern progress. It seemed the perfect crime. The evidence of a highly advanced predecessor, erased forever. But in their zeal to destroy the obvious, the falsifiers overlooked something fundamental. Something that could not be faked or hidden behind the screen of temporary decorations. They overlooked the climatic conditions embedded within the very design of these buildings. The surviving architecture, and even the structures destroyed but captured in photographs, cries out that it was created for a world with a profoundly different climate. A world where the concept of winter was either entirely absent or carried no mortal threat. The silent, most honest witness to the past is the construction itself, which flatly refuses to obey the logic of our modern climate. If we examine the so-called classical architecture, scattered from St. Petersburg and Moscow to Montreal and Chicago, we see a flagrant disregard for the laws of thermodynamics. These structures were conceived by engineers who, it seems, had never heard of harsh winters, of blizzards, of sub-zero temperatures. Gigantic panoramic windows, soaring several meters high, often beginning at the floor itself, are a thermal catastrophe for any region with a cold climate. Through such a vast expanse of glass, even with modern insulated panes, the heat loss is colossal. Yet according to the official history, they used only ordinary, thin glass. Even more absurd is the absence of vestibules, the essential thermal airlocks at an entrance. In any traditional home built in northern latitudes, the front door never opens directly into a living space or main hall. There is always an entryway, a double-door system to prevent freezing air from instantly chilling the interior. Yet in these majestic palaces, cathedrals, and administrative buildings, this fundamental principle is ignored. Grand doors open directly into cavernous halls, a design that invites the full fury of winter inside. They stand as unimpeachable witnesses, artifacts of a forgotten climate, their very stones a testament to a world they were built for, a world whose weather and whose truths have long since vanished from memory. In the grand edifices of the old world, we see them. Immense, towering doors opening directly onto the street. The implication is as simple as it is profound. When these structures were conceived and built, the temperature differential between the interior and the exterior must have been minimal. The architects had no fear of letting in the cold, for the simple reason that the cold, as we know it, may not have existed. A survey of this unified global architecture suggests a planet once bathed in a comfortable, warm, subtropical climate. The internal design of these colossal chambers reinforces this hypothesis of an eternal summer. With ceiling heights reaching 5, even 10 meters, heating such vast volumes of air by conventional means is an exercise in futility. Heated air, as physics dictates, rises, leaving those at ground level to freeze. To warm these halls with wood or coal would demand furnaces of cyclopean scale, burning around the clock. Yet a careful examination of the original plans and facades reveals a startling omission. Chimneys are almost entirely absent. The stoves and fireplaces we see today often appear as alien elements, brutally carved into the interiors, violating the pristine symmetry of the original design. Chimneys were added later, often by barbarically punching through walls and vaults, with rusted pipes scarring the elegant facades, a desecration clearly never intended by the master builders of the past. A persistent impression forms that the planet's climate did not gradually shift, but changed overnight. A global system that maintained a stable temperature across the Earth, perhaps through a different atmospheric pressure or a protective canopy effect, collapsed. In place of the perpetual summer came snow, ice, and a piercing wind. The new inhabitants, finding themselves in these sudden ice palaces, began a desperate struggle for survival. They bricked up superfluous windows, erected partitions to shrink the cavernous rooms, and installed crude iron stoves in a frantic attempt to find warmth. We now live in homes that were not built for us, nor for this climate. We insulate them, install central heating, and expend colossal resources to fight a cold they were never designed to repel. We remain hostages to an architectural logic that is not our own. And here, against a backdrop of a changed world, of lost technologies and vanished titans, the most unsettling of questions arises. If we did not build this world, if we do not fit its colossal scale and can barely survive within its ruins, then who are we in this story? To acknowledge this climatic and technological dissonance leads to a single, logical, however bitter, conclusion about our place in this grand historical drama. If we cast aside our pride and cease to blindly trust the sanitized narratives we are told, the truth becomes self-evident. We are not the great architects. We are not the creators of this world. We are merely its inheritors, squatters, accidental settlers, occupying the vacant, magnificent homes left behind by a civilization far greater than our own. Metropolis. We pitch our tents in the throne rooms, build our fires upon the marble floors, and use the shattered remains of advanced technology as primitive tools. This cognitive dissonance becomes almost physically palpable when one analyzes the chronicles of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The people captured in these early films and photographs seem utterly alien against the majestic backdrops. They are small, often ragged figures, scurrying between cyclopean columns and along granite embankments, evoking a profound sense of incongruity. They guide their creaking wooden carts down sweeping boulevards engineered for speeds and modes of transport they cannot comprehend. They trade vegetables and wares at the foot of edifices whose architectural complexity defies their own era's understanding, looking as out of place as medieval peasants on a starship launch pad. This is not the portrait of evolutionary development, of a society ascending step by step to the pinnacle of its craft. It is the portrait of regression, of survival among the ruins. We've been sold a comforting fable of linear progress, that we emerged from caves and, through our own ingenuity, built skyscrapers. But the truth, frozen in stone, whispers of a different past. We are living in a post-apocalyptic age, one that has quietly persisted for centuries. The Great Reset, which many suspect but dare not speak of aloud, has already occurred. A global cataclysm swept away the planet's true architects, beings who possessed forgotten technologies and perhaps even a unified consciousness. They left us an inheritance of empty cities and fractured knowledge, fragments we mistake for our own discoveries. Everything we herald as a modern achievement, our industry, our culture, our architecture, is largely just an attempt at imitation, or worse, a clumsy exploitation of this inherited legacy. We have learned to run new wires through ancient conduits. We have learned to patch holes in walls we could never hope to build, and we have invented 1,000 justifications to explain away that which we cannot fathom. To admit this is to shatter the very foundation of our worldview. Yet only by acknowledging that we live on the ashes of a great and fallen empire can we hope to cease being blind consumers of a past that is not our own. Only then might we begin the search for the true reasons our world is structured as it is. History is not a straight line. It is a circle. We now stand at a point in the cycle where memory has been erased, where the grandeur of our ancestors serves only as a backdrop for our own mundane affairs. It is time to open our eyes and see that the scenery around us is far too vast for the small play we are performing.